that looting the hinterland is one half of the reason we can call BRICS sub-imperialist, and the other is legitimating the Washcon and imperialism. So that's the basic argument about the BRICS. Of course, there's unevenness, there's a hierarchy. We have this best cartoonist in the English-speaking world, Charles Zapiro, who captures the problem of Chinese deindustrialization, something Brazil has also suffered. And we had a very telling incident with the Dalai Lama not being able to get a visa to South Africa because the Chinese told the South African government, don't give them a visa, the man. Well, in the meantime, in August, there was something terrible at this site. This is an advertisement for a big company, fading away, but the company's name is Lonmin. Lonmin. And Lonmin is the third largest producer of platinum, and platinum is very important for European autos, especially diesel engines. But this company, when it was called Lonrho, London and Rhodesia Company, was the unacceptable face of capitalism, according to the conservative British Prime Minister Edward Heath, because of the rule by this man, Tiny Rowland. He was in charge. Now there's another man, not totally in charge of Lonmin, but in the same role. He used to be a revolutionary, once even a Trotskyist, Cyril Ramaphosa, and then he was the head of the National Union of Mine Workers, head of the African National Congress, and on the August 15 eve of the massacre, he wrote an email to the police minister and to the mining minister saying, we need your intervention. The company can no longer deal with a wildcat strike. And this isn't a labor dispute. They are plainly dastardly criminal, must be characterized as such. There needs to be concomitant action. So here's a black entrepreneur owning 9% of Lonmin, former leader of the workers, and his smoking gun emails, which were revealed in a commission, led to these 3,000 people who were sitting on top of a mountain, harmlessly really. They were sitting on top of a mountain. They were not blocking Lonmin. They were not occupying the mine. They were not blocking any roads. They were not taking anyone hostage. They were simply sitting on a mountain. But the wildcat strike had to end that day. So these workers who were demanding a wage increase from about $550 to $800 a month, they were surrounded by the police, who shot tear gas and then drove them with barbed wire into a small area in which it is alleged these men were charging at the police with their little sticks, their machetes. But in fact, I would argue that it seems from all the evidence the men were running away. They were not charging towards the police with machine guns. You can see a white policeman ordering the blacks around. This is still very typical of the power relations. And the deaths, 10 at that site and 24 behind the scenes, 78 wounded, many crippled for life, 270 arrested. The man and the woman here, the prosecutors, and they said that the 270 were guilty of murder. So they actually accused the victims who survived of murder. There was a sweetheart union, the old National Union of Mine Workers, very involved with the mine bosses and the police in this horrible massacre, leaving blood dripping. And what happened immediately after was the workers we thought would be cowed and repressed, but they actually stayed on strike, and for 3 more weeks they were able to stop any production at Lonmin, and then finally Lonmin conceded, not entirely to the demands, but at least to a 22% increase. And then came the wildcat strikes, 100,000 workers in the mining sector, and then hundreds of thousands of more in transport, in autos, in the vineyards where you drink South African wines. I hope you taste the exploitation the next time on your lips. But now there are big strikes in the vineyards as well. And they spread all across the country in October and November. And the police shot many workers, in the meantime, many casualties. But what these workers did, these informal workers, they were able to run far ahead of the corporatist trade unions. Big labor, big government, big business, all working together in centralized bargaining councils and social contract. All of that was left behind as these workers made much more progress by acting independently and much more radically. Helped, of course, by women who were the critical force in the reproduction of cheap labor during apartheid. And very little changed in these shack settlements and the migrant relationships. And women took a huge brunt of the police repression. They were denied from having marches, but they ultimately succeeded. So these are some of the pictures, and Lonmin is one of the greatest companies for corporate social responsibility bullshit, and they are accepted as such, Ernst & Young giving them an excellent rating, the World Bank investing $150 million in Lonmin, in this Maracana mine, and putting it, as you see on the World Bank website, as the first case study of success of corporate social responsibility. And that meant a call for the World Bank to get the hell out of extractive industries. And this is really the typical quote of cynics, those who would suggest we have lost our revolution. Cecil John Rhodes, maybe the most murderous man in African history, competing with King Leopold of Belgium, Paul Volcker of the Federal Reserve, to kill the most people in Africa. But Cecil John Rhodes would have given his approval to this effort to make the South African economy of the 21st century entirely appropriate and fit for its time. That was the opinion of Nelson Mandela when he launched the Mandela Rhodes Foundation to confirm how disastrous our politics have gone. And the younger brother of Thabo Mbeki put it well. The big companies like Lonmin, based in London, taking their capital out of South Africa, a bigger threat to economic freedom than the ANC Youth League. So we are really resource cursed, the worst inequality in the world. We've overtaken Brazil. Workers losing their profit, the wage to profit share, losing jobs more rapidly than any major country except Spain, having this incredible rise in consumer debt, with interest rates higher than any country except Greece, with the highest property bubble in the world, twice my native Ireland's at number 2, at nearly 400% increase between 1997 and 2008, with a huge outflow of profits and dividends and interest, that red line going down since 2000, as all the big South African companies relocated to London. And that made South Africa rank, according to The Economist, as the most risky of 17 peer economies. And a huge foreign debt now emerging as these outflows of capital affect the economy. So this is the resource curse indications at macroeconomic level, but I want to ask you one question, because Russia is also resource cursed of the 5 BRICS. As we try to get a handle on Africa being resource cursed, with lots of claims these days that Africa is doing very well. Have you heard of this? Maybe you saw The Economist magazine 10 years ago, hopeless continent. Last year, Africa's rising. And did you see last week, Time magazine cover story? Africa is rising. Everybody's happy about 6% GDP growth rates in Africa. And it's time for us to ask, not just about growth, but about politics, because The Economist cartoonist said, oh look, Barack Obama, civil society, good governance are up. Down with the dictators, the strongmen, the bankers. The reality is that we have many tyrants in Africa. 4 of them have just departed. 3 last year in popular revolutions, Ben Ali in Tunisia, Mubarak in Egypt, Gaddafi in Libya, and Meles Zenawi, the dictator of Ethiopia, just died. But all these others are still in place, and all of them, with 1 or 2 exceptions, get the support, the friendship, the aid, the drones from Barack Obama. The drones are coming to hunt down Al-Qaeda across Central and North Africa, but that coincides also with Africa's oil, especially in sites like Nigeria, now one of the very largest suppliers to the United States, as well as wars, Sudan, Angola, Chad, Congo, and civil wars, and a new series of oil countries now under exploration, like Uganda, where the US is very, very involved, and Ghana. But not just oil, here's a map of where Africa's minerals are. You see the big circle is South Africa, $12 trillion in reserves estimated. And you see the black part, nearly half, is platinum. And along with Russia and Zimbabwe, that's the world's platinum. That's 85% in Russia, I mean in South Africa. Well, when we think about GDP, when there's so much extraction, we can't accept the numbers given by economists, and we're now beginning to look at a genuine progress indicator, because we need to make corrections, and I hope all of you do this when you work as well. This was something that Galen told us to pay special attention to, because GDP misses resource depletion, his special point yesterday, pollution, unpaid women's work and community work, and other social values. So if we want to move to a buen vivir, the Latin American good living, well, we need to change the GDP. And here's even a recognition in the Gaborone Declaration of 10 African governments in May that natural capital, what most of us would call nature, is worth counting and adding to the national income accounts. So let's see what happens if we do that, even though we will probably reject the whole idea of natural capital. Well, the World Bank does it by adjusting downwards for depreciation of fixed capital, adding education for human capital, and then that large jump is the depletion of natural resources, as well as pollution. Now, when you do that, take Africa in 2008, you get a decline in the actual wealth of Africa, now 6% a year. You can compare this to East Asia or Latin America, which are still growing. But this is a reflection that Africa is being uniquely looted. And 6% a year decline, not 6% a year growth, is the way we should understand Africa in the world economy. And of course, the winners are the mining houses and petroleum companies, whose profits are now in super profit range. If you take South Africa as a whole, our most balanced economy in Africa, with the greatest industrial base, still loses $245 per person per year. We're not earning $5,000. Once you do the net correction, our adjusted net savings. What about the other BRICS? Russia, you lose $13 every year. Boris, when you wake up on January 1 and you go to bed on December 31 the same year, you are $13 poorer. I think you should just stay in bed and not go to work, because the Russian average, the more you extract, the poorer you get, like South Africa. Well, there's the other big factor. The BRICS are the big emitters, along with, of course, the US and the EU and Australia, but South Africa is there. And of course, the hinterlands are the big losers, the hinterlands of the BRICS, like the Andes Mountains and parts of Latin America, or most of Central and Southern Africa, or the Himalayas, or the small islands. So these are the losers of climate change, which will be devastating. Well, who's resisting? There is a competition every year. You saw it in London, the Olympics, for gold medals. There's the other one, which is the class struggle competition, and the judges are the World Economic Forum in Davos, and they have a global competitiveness report. And under labor market efficiency, you'll find cooperation in labor-employer relations. And this year, we're #1 in South Africa. Yay! Viva! Last year, we were #7. We can look at the other BRICS, but it's a very exciting time because we also have the highest rate of social protests. I know there are Chinese promoters, and it's true, there are, what, did you say 150,000 protests? But how many people have you got there, Lawrence? 1.4 billion. 1.4 billion, yeah. Yeah, we have only got 50 million, and we have 10,000 protests. We know you're a very competitive country in China, but I think we're still ahead. I have a 5-minute warning, so I'll just come to the point. They don't count when it's less than 10,000 people. Yeah, our police and your police need to get together and correlate the protest research methodologies. The problem is we have popcorn protests, and I think you do too. They pop up and they fall back down, and they don't link up. And if the wind is blowing in the right, if the popcorn is in the air, then we have xenophobic protests. Those are happening a great deal as well. But we have very good campaigns, so I'll just tell you about one very quickly and then wrap up with BRICS. One is, we're looking for antiretroviral medicines and water and electricity and jobs, blah, blah, blah. We're trying for the Kagerlitsky structural reforms. non-reformist reforms, as Andre Gortz put it. One of them that we won, which is really remarkable, it used to cost $15,000 per year to get AIDS medicines if you're HIV positive. And the city I live in, Durban, has more than anywhere in the world, over 700,000 people HIV positive. So it was impossible, and the woman up at the top, Gugu Dlamini, was killed just trying to do AIDS education because there was no hope. There was stigma. Her own neighbors killed her, stoned her to death as she did AIDS education. So this was 98, 99, and we got a Medicines Act to get compulsory licensing, but the US State Department was opposed to it, Al Gore especially. So when he ran for president, protesters called on by South Africans went to every campaign rally he had and said, Al Gore's greed kills African babies. And at that point, he was feeling that they were more of a nuisance than the value of the contributions from the pharmaceutical industry, and he gave up and he stopped that pressure. And then we had a big AIDS conference in Durban where the president, Thabo Mbeki, said, HIV doesn't cause AIDS, those medicines are toxic. So there was what we call AIDS denialism that led to about 400,000 people dying unnecessarily, according to Harvard studies. There was a lawsuit. To cut a long story short, by 2004, all the pressure, even in the World Trade Organization, led to a victory for the activists. And the African National Congress changed its policy. Generic medicines were produced. There was an increase in funds from the Global Fund for AIDS and malaria and TB. And PEPFAR was started, a program by George W. Bush, and we got 1.5 million people under treatment for AIDS medicines by last year, which is really remarkable. I challenge you to give me any other example of progress that was forced by activists from below, maybe since the end of apartheid. There are big threats. Obama's running the program down. But the successes are a huge increase in life expectancy from 52 years in 1984 to 60 years, announced last month. Policy advocacy success, but also for capital's most important single commodity, would you agree? Intellectual property. That now is under question, because the AIDS activists were able to say to big pharmaceutical companies, we reject your patents, and we're going to make generic production. The Indians are under great pressure from Obama to stop the generic production. So this is a big challenge. But decommodifying and de-stratifying and deglobalizing capital and globalizing solidarity. These are the lessons that I think I can take to the very final 2 minutes, which is what do we do with BRICS? I think we want to do all of those things. That's our model for building from below against capital and against capitalist states. So these are the people that met in New Delhi last year, and they're meeting in Durban this year. And we believe that they serve the 1%, and very quickly for 4 reasons. Socioeconomic attacks on the majority of their people. There's not one of the BRICS countries that is free of these severe inequality, poverty, disease, violence against women, inadequate education, prohibitions on labor. Secondly, systematic political and civil rights violations. Here in Russia, very good examples, militarization, jailings of activists, increasing patriarchy, homophobia, and the massacre I told you about. Third is the regional domination and legitimation of global neoliberalism, the $100 billion for the IMF being one example. And fourthly, the maldevelopment strategies that are eco-destructive, consumerist-centric in the way Boris talked about yesterday, overly financialized, climate-frying, nuclear-powered, promoting parastatal and corporate profits, reaching crisis proportions. And we have some very good examples in the host city, Durban. Therefore, you must join us, comrades, in Durban, in 23rd to 27 March. If you feel compelled, I'll give you a rundown of our proposed activities in our little center. But if you can't come, we beg you to help us rename BRICS. We always like to have acronyms, since we're just remembering this massacre at Marikana. It's a new word for many of us, but it's an old problem of repression. We think BRICS might be best understood as brutalizing, repressive, intensifying corporate sub-imperialism. Thank you, comrades. We know you can do better with acronyms too. Thanks.